This week in post, getting vibrant colors in your sunrise photos. Hey everyone, I'm Scott Davenport and welcome to In Post. Continuing with Sunset Cliffs, I showed you some behind the scenes footage earlier in the week. I'm going to take one of those photos and put it through the processing here to really bring out some of the vibrant colors that were happening that morning. And this is one of those situations where I know that what I saw when I was out, knee deep in the ocean, looking up at the sky, didn't quite translate to my raw file. And so I want to bring out some of those morning colors, and especially raising up some of the shadows in my foreground areas, because I had plenty of color going on there, just that the camera didn't capture it quite the way that my eye saw it. So let's get over here into Lightroom. I've got the photo loaded, and as you can see, this is, other than a basic lens profile and spot removal correction, nothing else has been done. This is what came out of the camera. And so did some very basic things. Started off with cropping and straightening. So just to tighten things in, and I kind of got rid of a little bit of that scrub that you saw on the right-hand edge, so like there to there. That wasn't adding anything to the photo. Moving into white balance and exposure. As soon as I do white balance, you're going to start to see some big differences already. So did a custom white balance, really starting with something in the cloud that should be white and adding a little bit of a purplish magenta tint to it. And a little more exposure, just a little less than half a stop, just to brighten things up a little bit, get that histogram moving over to the right a little more. Next, adjusted tone. And so now you're going to see this foreground open up. So we're opening up the shadows a lot, reining in a little bit of the highlights, so that the whitish, brighter areas of the clouds aren't getting cut out. Pop the whites up a little black point action there. These kind of things I've done a bunch of times. You can see other videos how I do the adjustments on those. Now let's get into the presence, and we start to bring in a lot of that color. So moved on down the basic panel to presence. And so now adding a little more clarity, so the cliffs are getting crisper. Vibrance and saturation, starting to see more of those oranges and pinks that were in the cloud, and those same colors being reflected in the shallows of the ocean. And this is the ocean, but it's a long exposure. It's about 10 to 15 seconds, if I remember correctly. So it's smoothing things out here, and you get that nice color reflection there. From here, went really into targeted stylization. So I want to add a little more detail, much more color into the sky. To me, the clouds are the star of the show for this photo. And then also just working on the foreground separately from what's going on in the sky. So turning over to the sky, added a graduated filter. Let me open that panel up so you can see where we are. So I have this guy right here, and if I hover there for a second, you can see it's only affecting the sky. I've done, dropped the filter on there, but then used one of the brushes to erase all this area here, so I'm not affecting the cliff faces. I'm just bringing things into the sky. So what am I doing here? A little bit of contrast, slight nudge on the tint. What really made the difference, clarity was for grabbing a little bit of those textures in the clouds, but dehaze, just that little tiny touch, that really made a big difference. I'll turn that off for a second. Good, and then I'll undo that and turn it back on. It's adding, I don't know what to say, it's just this extra amount of crispness and detail. It really helped out the photo. Pop saturation, and again, sharpness, because I want those clouds to pop out. Then moved on to the rocks and the foreground. Now this was a couple of different adjustments. There was another gradient filter, and also then a brush, but to add crispness. So here's the gradient, as we still have that tool open. And this is to kind of mimic what was done in the sky on the foreground, but not affecting the rocks, and doing it to a lesser degree. And then in the brush area, bring that up, and I think my brush point was over here. So we'll see that is really just brushing onto the rocks, a little more clarity, adding a little bit of warmth. So you can see that warmth adjustment right here. And that's helping separate and raise awareness, so have those cliffs pop off the screen a little bit more. Now the last two things I did were kind of less obvious. Did a split tone effect on the shadows. Now this is a really subtle one. I'll wait for this to catch up with me here, but open up the split toning pane. And so there is a very slight orange tint. It's barely perceivable here, and only applying it to the shadows. And that's adding a little bit extra warmth into the cliffs. I toggled it back and forth several times and ended up, I liked the effect that I had there. So that split toning, even if I'm not touching the highlights, that became valuable for this photo. And then finishing it off with a vignette, just nothing particularly special. I will point out, because one of the readers of my blog had suggested trying this out, and my machine will finally catch up with me. Come on. Well, it's not catching up with me. I'll just point it out here. This color priority selection, in particular with skies, it seems to like smooth out the edges of the vignette a little better. And so I hadn't played with that before, and for this photo, I found that to be useful. So that was a really cool suggestion and tip that someone sent in, and I'm already making use of it. So when all said and done, here is the before of our photo. And here's the after. Major difference, a lot more vibrance, a lot more color into that sunrise. So the tip of the week is, I think, the dehaze filter. That was kind of a pretty unique thing. We think of it in terms of, removing haze from either, a misty scene or maybe just a desert where there's a lot of sand and grit in the sky, and you're trying to reach far away to a distant mountain range or whatever it might be. Or just smog if you're living in a city. That can really start to cut down on the haze. But it was very useful for adding a little more crispness into clouds and then letting that color shine through as well. So think about the dehaze filter beyond just, haze, smog, smoke, that kind of thing. And that does it for this week in post. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, leave me a comment, shoot me a question. Love getting your questions. If you've got any questions about post-processing, please, feel free to ask me, whether they're general, specific about a tool, or if you've got a technique that you want to share. This color priority item, that was something new. And so I'd love to get my own knowledge to grow for post-processing tips, because, hey, there's a lot of smart people on the planet, and most of them aren't me. So until next time, my name's Scott Davenport. Happy shooting.